are specialists in other disciplines. So basic aim is to get everybody on board to at least provide COVID support to our relatives so that we can manage 85 to 90% of the COVID cases at home, so that we can reduce the pressure on the hospitals as long as we can. I will come back to the house rules later on, and the way the program is structured is we have a presentation from Satish Gupta, who's a physician in East Delhi, has his own nursing home, and he has been teaching all of us. In fact, a batchmate referred to him as Professor Satish Gupta because he's been teaching all of us with his COVID updates. And so he will be making a presentation as the starting point. And then we have a very interesting question and answer session, which will be moderated by Vikram Jaggi, who all of you know is the director of asthma and allergy centers in Delhi and Gurgaon. He's also into spreading awareness, keeps writing frequently in newspapers and magazines, and also has written books on asthma and allergy. And following this interaction, and for this, I'll come over to the house rules, how you can ask your questions. We will request all of you not to use the mic to ask the questions. The question and answers will come through the chat, and to save time, Vikram will be picking these up and asking the expert, who's Satish in this case, to answer them, and between the two of them. And then after this, we'll have the key takeaways from today's session being summarized by Dr. Pradeep Rastagi, who's a senior consultant and head of interventional cardiology at Jaipur Golden Hospital, DM from KGMC. And he's the one who is very good at summarizing. So he will be summarizing the key takeaways from today's session. So few housekeeping announcements. Request everybody to please mute yourself. If you are having connectivity issues, please switch off your video so that you are at least able to hear and listen to the other participants more clearly. If you have a good bandwidth, feel free to keep your camera on. Question and answers through the chat session. And so summarizing by Dr. Rastagi in the end. So let's start off, and I will request Dr. Satish Gupta to start his presentation. Over to you, Satish.
Thank you everybody, and I'm thankful to all my batchmates, especially Dr. Anu Sharma, who conceptualized this meeting. I should better say that I'm no COVID expert, but I have been given this task to share my views just because I have been writing certain things and people have been appreciating them. And I believe that this is a group where large number of people have good experience. They're all stalwarts in their own fields. And we will try to limit ourselves in this talk to the basic management of the COVID-19, and especially the homebound management during the isolation. How can we help our patients? Because the epidemic or the pandemic has gone beyond the expected proportions and the beds are not available. And when the beds are not available, even the oxygen is not available. And this one has been one of the cruelest months of the pandemic for India. Not only India, it has been for the entire world. And if you see this slide, you will appreciate that in month of April, we have had nearly 70,000 cases. And these 70,000 cases in 1 month have been much more than the last 6 months of the cases, and the mortality are proportionately very, very high. And this number of cases, India has been able to surpass even the USA and the countries together. Now let us try to recapitulate what we have learned in last 1 year. The disease has been there for last 1 year. What we have been able to learn in last 1 year, how our knowledge has progressed. We have been able to understand the pathogenesis of COVID-19 infection and the diagnosis. We are much more aware about the diagnostic modalities, including the RT-PCR. But the variation in the virus in itself poses new challenges. We now understand that the coronavirus does not follow any seasonal variation, and but we know that it does not survive on the various surfaces for very long times. We know that it survives in the plastic and the steel for a longer duration of time, and on the porous surfaces like wood and the cloths and the paper, it survives for a few hours. But we all know that the transmission of the virus is not basically fomite bound. It is merely the droplet infection or the airborne transmission, which is the main cause of infection. We also have progressed a bit about the treatment, but there has not been any significant progress in the antiviral treatment. And we know much more about the antiviral, anti-inflammatory part of the treatment. We have some clarity on the anticoagulants, but still there is a lot to be known about the anticoagulants. And not many associations all across the world are able to present clear-cut guidelines as to when to use the anticoagulants and what doses and how much duration. Clinical presentation of the disease is nearly the same as in the last year. Patients have been presenting with fever, sore throat. It is important that we should all understand that the rhinorrhea is not a very important component of the coronavirus disease. Complications of the disease have been nearly the same. The patients have been presenting with fatigue, fever, cough, myalgia, headache. Some patients of late have been presenting with the diarrhea and some unusual presentation, but we'll try to limit ourselves to the usual presentation, which starts with fever, headache, and fatigue. The second wave has been much more detrimental, and it has been affecting the young people. And the second important part of the second wave has been that the entire families has been affected. And it's very unfortunate that in the entire family, there's nobody to even bring the drugs. There's nobody at home to cook food and to take care of each other. It has been really, really very, very difficult times. And almost all the family members, including everybody around, has been affected in Delhi and other metro cities. And I would say that the phenomena extends to the entire India. And there have been a good amount of vaccination in last 1 year, but there have been cases which have been occurring following the vaccination, some cases after the first dose and some cases even after the 2 doses. Though it is being said that the disease occurring after the vaccination is much more mild and does not lead to the admission in ICU. But we have come across certain cases where the patients have required the ICU admission, but definitely the mortality after the vaccination has been pretty low. Now coming on to the clinical presentation, I would like you to all focus on this slide. This is a very, very important slide. Most of the patients, they can be treated at home because they experience a mild illness. But this statement, I have to recount again because the coronavirus in the second wave has been really, really very different. And this is the chart. I would like you to kindly refer to this chart. The onset of symptoms. You should all try to find out the first day of illness. It is very important to find out the first day of illness. Sometimes we are not able to find out the first day of illness. We should be very specific in asking the patient which day you started having sore throat, which day you had this headache, which day you had the fever. And from that day, you start counting. And whenever you are making a prescription, you always write this is which day of the disease is it? Why do we count the first day? Because it is the seventh day onwards till 11th, 12th day that the complications start in maximum number of cases. Though the disease spectrum has been squeezing itself and the complications have been occurring earlier also, but by and large, most of the patients, they might land up into the cytokine storm or the complication, they might start requiring the hospital admission 7th day onwards. So it is very, very important that you should all have the first day of the symptoms. And during these 7 days, the patient is infective. As the days advance, the infectivity of the patient goes down, except in the severe cases where the patient has been admitted to the hospital. Most of the cases, the infectivity is not there, even if the RT-PCR might be positive, but the replication effective virus has not been able to be isolated from the nasal swabs or the oropharyngeal swabs in most of the cases. So most of the isolation guidelines would be limited to the first 7 days, though the government of India or the other governments or the CDC is still recommended isolation of about 10 days for all the cases and for about 20 days in moderate to severe cases. And now coming on to the poor predictors of the poor prognosis, which are the patients which about whom we need to be extremely careful. These are the patients who have the advanced age, but the second wave, as I said, has been affecting the young people also. And we have seen quite a good number of young patients getting into complications, patients who have been smoking, patients, especially with the obesity, diabetes, hypertension, ischemic heart disease. These are the patients who have the higher chances of getting into the complications. Why do these patients, they go into the complications? Because these patients, they already have the established endothelial dysfunction. And this is one disease which basically affects the endothelium. And when the endothelium is already diseased, is already dysfunctioning, the coronavirus or the COVID-19 is able to target the endothelium much faster in these patients. And there will be certain laboratory feature also, which we'll be talking about. Once we say that these patients, they are likely to have worse prognosis, it would not mean that all these patients are likely to die. But if we are able to institute therapy early in the course of disease in these patients, we might be better off saving many lives. We'll be talking about this, the NLR ratio. I'll be coming onto this slide again. This is the neutrophil lymphocyte ratio. And in the slide, you can see that as the age advances and the neutrophil lymphocyte ratio increases, we have the increasing mortality. When the neutrophil lymphocyte ratio is less than 3.3, the mortality is pretty low. But as the age advances and the neutrophil lymphocyte ratio is high in these patients, they are likely to have a higher mortality. But a word of caution, whenever we see a high mortality, whenever we see a high neutrophil lymphocyte ratio, does not mean that all these patients are going to die or they are going to slip into the severe disease, but we need to be extremely careful about these patients in as far as the monitoring goes. This is the slide which shows that there have been pretty high mortality as the age advances. You can see that the blue graph shows those who survived at the younger age, but as the age advances, the red part of the pie chart increases, or the bar chart increases, showing that these people are likely to have higher mortality. This side on the left hand side shows that the patients who have the higher myoglobin levels, troponin levels, or the seroactive proteins, they are likely to have more mortality. Now coming on to the pathophysiology of the disease, though it is a viral disease, it is likely to be infective pathology, but the disease pathophysiology has been limited to two things. One is the inflammation and second is the thrombosis. How did we come to know about the thrombosis? The thrombosis of the disease, the thrombotic part of the disease was basically diagnosed after the autopsy findings which were conducted in the jail where our colleague Dr. Harish Moorjani has been working. The disease started in Wuhan, but till the time it reached the USA, we were not clear about the pathophysiology of the disease. When it reached USA and the post-mortem examination of the jail inmates was done who have died from the coronavirus, it was found that their lung tissues had huge amount of thrombosis and the inflammation. So it was said that this disease is not only inflammatory, but also thrombotic in nature. How does the disease work? Basically, the coronavirus is one virus which not only imposes a good amount of inflammation, it causes hyperinflammation. It leads to the decrease in the release of lot amount of cytokines and the markers of inflammation. Secondly, it is able to somehow suppress the innate immunity. It is able to block the lymphocyte, it is able to block the neutrophils, not the lymphocyte, but the other immune macrophages and the other cells which are basically protective in nature. So inflammation is increasing, but the virus has suppressed by its nature the lymphocytes and other protective cells. So there is double attack on the body, and these two things together, they cause the problem. And this is the slide which has been there, in which on the left hand side you can see that the lung parenchyma shows huge number of inflammatory cells, and on the right hand side you can see that this is the capillary, which shows that this capillary has been thrombosed, and this thrombosis is one feature which is basically requesting the physicians, which have been telling the physicians to use the anticoagulants. And this is the inflammation on the left-hand side, which warrants the use of anti-inflammatory drugs. Now coming on to the various investigations, what are the various investigations which the patients are required to have at home? Though there can be long list of investigation, but because we are basically confining ourselves to the homebound treatment, I'll be talking about the various investigations. The important investigations would be the CBC, CRP, D-dimer, LFT, and KFT. All these 4 or 5 investigations, they are going to suffice. People like to go for the LDH, for the ferritin. These investigations like IL-6, they might be important in the ICU setting, but for the homebound treatment, the CBC, CRP, D-dimer, LFT, and KFT might suffice. And one thing which we should not forget is the use of blood sugar. Most of the times, the patient will say that they do not have diabetes because they have got a surgery done, they have been testing their blood sugar levels at home, they never found themselves to be diabetic. But here the disease in itself is diabetogenic. The virus has been affecting the islet cells, the pancreas, giving rise to the hyperglycemia. Secondly, the stress of the disease itself. And secondly, third, the use of steroids, they can raise the blood sugar levels. And so the blood sugar should always be monitored, even in those patients who say that they never had sugar. And how frequently should we repeat these investigations? Initially, you may advise these investigations, and the second or the fourth day of illness, you do not expect that these investigations are likely to be having some great abnormalities at a very early stage. But these investigations, because they have certain baseline values also, are going to serve as a baseline. And the second investigation are to be done after the first week of illness, that is during the 7th to 9th day of illness. And they should be compared with the first set of investigation. A word about the CT scan. CT scan is not required in all the patients, and I can assure you that all of you can see the CT scan very clearly because there are ground glass opacities and basically the lung parenchyma at the periphery is affected. And this is one particular disease where you will find that the normal lung and the periphery, the ground glass opacities. These are the white opacities, which are the ground glass opacities. And these are the areas, this you can see on the periphery of the lung, where the ground glass opacities have been seen. There has been thrombosis of the lung vessels. And these black areas are the normal lung tissue. And this is the pathophysiological disease, which basically leads to the higher mortality when these patients are put on ventilator. It is very important to understand because when the patients are put on ventilator, these normal lung tissues, they do not tolerate the high peak, that is the high pressure, these normal lung tissues, they will not tolerate. And if you do not give this high pressure, these diseased lung tissue will not open up and the patient's oxygen saturation will not improve. So it has been postulated and has been seen that when you give these patients oxygenation without the without the ventilation, high pressure, these patients, they perform much better than the patients who go on to the ventilator. What about the CT severity score? The lung tissue, the entire lung tissue is divided into 5 lobes. The right side, there are 3 lobes. On the left side, there are 2 lobes. All the lobes are given 5 marks each, depending on the volume of the lung infected or the affected. And accordingly, the patients are given the CT score of 5 by 25 or 6 by 25. Up to 9, it is said that it is mild disease, and up to 16, it is said it is up to 15, it is a moderate disease, and beyond 16, it is the severe disease. Why up to 16, it is the mild disease? Because the lungs' own reserve is very high, and even 50% of the lung, if it is not affected, then it is, and it is nearly normal, then it can really provide good amount of oxygenation. So it is a moderate disease. So people should not get bothered, should not get worried, should not get panicky once the lung is involved, but it is definitely a cause of concern. How do we interpret the various other investigations? One is the CBC. Whenever you look at the CBC, kindly look at the leukopenia, because I said that the virus is going to decrease the number of lymphocytes, it is going to suppress the lymphocytes. So lymphopenia may be an important feature. And when the lymphocytes get suppressed, the NLR ratio increases. And the cutoff of 3.13, some studies they say 3.4, some of studies would say it is 3.5. When it is high, then these patients do not feel that they are going to die. Couple it with the advancing age, and they are likely to the patients who are likely to require good amount of monitoring. Presence of monocytes and the eosinophils. If you see that these monocytes are present and the eosinophils are present, and be assured that they may be good indicators. Sometimes, whenever we see that the thrombocytes are decreased, we get panicky that we are having a co-infection by the dengue virus. No, it is not so. It can be thrombocytopenia in the range of say 75,000, 80,000, 1 lakh. Platelet count can be seen in about 20% of patients. A word about CRP. CRP is the single most lab parameter which is most important in these patients, and the CRP values, they are likely to increase on 6th, 7th day, and if the CRP values are more than 70 milligram per liter, even with the normal SpO2, this should warn the physician that these patients, they might require early institution of steroids, and the patient might be in the impending cytokine storm. And now a word about D-dimer. D-dimer is one parameter which is found, which is being done in most of the patients, but it is important to know that the D-dimer values, they will not guide you to the anticoagulation in these patients. Anticoagulation is to be started in all the patients who have hypoxia. And D-dimer values might be high in patients who are advanced in age, because D-dimer values, they increase with the age. And whenever you see that the patient of 65 years, 70 years, fairly well settled, has normal oxygenation, is on steroids, but the D-dimer values are 1.7 or say 1700. Do not think of starting long-term anticoagulation in these patients. Kindly be like holding yourself, because anticoagulation in the old age people might in itself have its own problems. Now coming on to the LFT. LFT is commonly missed parameter in a number of patients, but it is important because the virus in itself causes hepatitis, and it can give rise to the mild elevation of SGOT, SGPT, and gamma GT. And these parameters, they can be raised in about 60% of patients. I'm saying that 60% figure is slightly higher. But these parameters are important to monitor, because we have been giving favipiravir and remdesivir in these patients. Both of these drugs are having a toxicity profile on the liver. So if the favipiravir should not be given if the SGOT, SGPT are more than 100, and the cutoff values for the use of remdesivir may be slightly high, because this drug is given in slightly sick patients. Now coming on to the LDH, I have been advocating again and again that the homebound treatment patients should not be unnecessarily burdened with the advice of LDH measurements. A word about IL-6, a very important investigation. What is IL-6? Interleukin-6 levels. Interleukin-6 levels, where we have been studying in the MBBS and the post-MBBS days, was a research test. But the coronavirus has brought it to the common lab test parameters. But it is important to understand that the sample of the IL-6 should be taken, and should be taken in the EDTA vial, and the sample should reach the laboratory within half an hour. Most of the labs which are collecting samples, and they are running from pillar to post, all these boys, the home collection boy, they are not able to drop the sample to the lab within half an hour. Why is it so? Because the because the WBCs in the collected sample, they keep on releasing the interleukin-6, and if the sample is stored, the IL-6 values are likely to be very, very high, and they are going to give an erroneous reading. Secondly, the most important part about the IL-6 is that the values are not reproducible from the lab to lab. And if the same lab changes the method, same lab changes the kit, then the same sample done in the same lab by two different parameters, by the kits, may not have the same results. So it is very important that in case you are planning to follow up the IL-6 levels, the sample should be sent to the same lab and should be reaching the lab within half an hour. Cutoff values of a properly done IL-6 more than 60 picograms per liter are indicative of impending cytokine stroke syndrome, and they might guide you to the impending respiratory failure. Ferritin values, certain people get panic about the ferritin values. They are basically one parameter which rises slowly and comes down slowly. These parameters might be important for those patients who have been admitted in ICU. They might constantly have a ferritin value of more 2,000 nanograms per liter. But those patients who have high ferritin values on the homebound treatment should not be a very, very big cause of concern. And most important thing about all these investigations is that do not get panicky about one investigation. If your patient is comfortable maintaining good oxygen saturation, is free from symptoms, and the lab parameters are high, kindly ignore these parameters. Coming around to the treatment part, as I said that we have not been able to make much progress onto the antiviral front. The treatment remains confined to the pharmacological methods and the non-pharmacological means. It is important to understand the non-pharmacological interventions are as important as the pharmacological interventions. Rather, I would say that the non-pharmacological interventions are much more important to decrease mortality, and they include the oxygen therapy, awake proning, and the prone ventilation. And the oxygen therapy is important in these patients, particularly those patients who go on to the hypoxia. These patients, they have happy hypoxia. What is happy hypoxia? It is important to understand that a patient of coronavirus may not be having any symptom. He may be sitting in the OPD, absolutely hale and hearty, without showing any symptoms of respiratory distress. And if you check his oxygenation, you might find that the oxygenation level is 75, pretty low. This oxygenation is going to send panics in the hospital staff if some patient of cardiac disease or the lung parenchyma disease or the pneumonia, apart from the coronavirus, comes to the hospital. Because these patients at a low level of less than 90, they are likely to have respiratory distress, they are likely to have fatigue. But these patients, they tolerate, the patients with the COVID-19, they tolerate the hypoxia very well. So hypoxia is called as a happy hypoxia, and you should not give any homebound treatment to a patient who does not have facility for monitoring the oxygenation. How do we go about the oxygenation therapy? Oxygen therapy can be given by the nasal mask. Nasal mask is basically, these are the nasal prongs. They can be inserted in the nose, and they are fairly well tolerated. But the problem with the nasal mask is that they give a lower FiO2, because good amount of oxygen is mixed with the inspired air. So the actual amount of oxygen reaching the lung becomes less. Second is the oxygen face mask, which we all have seen. There is some amount of oxygen which gets pent up into the mask and the nose. So the FiO2 delivered by the face mask is slightly better. And the oxygen face mask is better in the sense because it also holds up the some viruses, though it is not may not be truly correct. And the most important mask is the oxygen non-rebreathing oxygen reservoir bag. In this bag, the oxygen gets collected over here. The patient is exhaling to the atmosphere, but inhaling from the reservoir. So the FiO2 increases. When the patient is not able to maintain the oxygenation at home, it is important to change this oxygen mask to the oxygen non-rebreathing reservoir bag. And these reservoir bags are not easily available in the market these days because of scarcity, especially in Delhi. And so the doctors, they can make their own reservoir bag with the help of a anesthetist using the vein circuit. When should the oxygen therapy be started? The oxygen therapy should be started whenever the oxygenation goes to less than 94%. And how do we start? As I already said, you can start it with the oxygen concentrator or with the oxygen cylinder. These days in Delhi, the oxygen cylinders are in limited supply. And we have seen over the last few days that the intermittent oxygen therapy, even in patients who have a low SpO2 of 84%, 85% works. These patients, they have been trying to conserve oxygen. They have been using the oxygen at 1 to 2 liters per minute. They switch off the oxygen for some time, and then they restart the oxygen, and they have been doing fairly well if they are supplemented with the anti-inflammatory steroids. And when these patients are not able to maintain oxygenation, they might need admission. And the high flow nasal cannula, which can deliver a oxygenation rate of up to 60 liters per minute, might be required in the ICU. But the oxygen cylinders and the home-based oxygen concentrators, they can give a oxygen concentration of about, say, oxygen concentrators, they can give you a oxygen of about, say, 5 liters per minute, but do not rely upon this concentration because as the concentrator becomes old, the filter in the concentrator becomes choked and it can basically give you the air itself. So kindly be careful about the oxygen concentrator, but the oxygen cylinders, they are likely to give you a oxygen which is more than 95% pure. But there is issue of refilling of the cylinders these days in Delhi. Prone position. When the oxygenation does
Dr.
not
Satish, just to Dr. Satish, just to remind you, we have received a huge number of questions in the Q&A. And
I'll
if you could please stick to the time and close this presentation in 10 minutes so that you can answer.
Fine. We'll be taking up all these issues.
Thank you.
The prone position is very important. You kindly look at this photograph. The prone position is very, very important. The hands have to be in front. You have to put two pillows. You have to put two pillows below the chest and one pillow below the knees. The belly should be hanging freely. If a patient complains that he has been uncomfortable on the prone position, you have to be really looking for if the belly is not getting pressed. And if the patient is not able to tolerate the prone position, the patient may be asked to sit. Now we come down to the pharmacological interventions in the SARS-CoV patient. As I've said that it is a purely infectious disease. Antivirals have a very little role to play. The treatment basically rests upon the anti-inflammatory drugs and the antithrombotic agents. Anti-inflammatory drugs are steroid, tocilizumab, baricitinib, and the antiviral drugs hardly antiviral drugs, remdesivir, fluperazole. And now we have the low molecular weight heparin and the heparin. Dexamethasone, very important steroids. I'll be focusing my talk on this because this is one intervention which all the physicians, all the doctors, all the MBBS doctors, they can do and save the lives. This all started with the recovery trial which was held in UK, and it was found that dexamethasone decreases the mortality. Apart from oxygen, this is the only therapy which has been found to decrease mortality in the COVID-19 patients. All the patients of oxygen saturation below 94% should be started on steroids, irrespective of the day of disease. Previously, it was being said that the oxygen should be started not in the first week, but in the second wave of the coronavirus disease. We have been seeing that the patients have been deteriorating pretty fast, especially the obese patients, especially the patients who are diabetic. They are likely to go into the severe disease. They are likely to have the complications. So these patients, they should be started on steroids at the earliest indication of cytokine storm. What are the indications of cytokine storm? The cytokine storm, one should suspect when the patient complains that she or he has been having extreme weakness. Patients, they say that they have been feeling to lie down in the bed. They don't want to even go to the toilet. They cannot even go to the toilet unsupported. Do not ignore weakness. Pain in the calf muscles. This could be a very important feature which might be ignored. Secondly, the patient suddenly rising fevers, patient oxygen suddenly dropping. These things are the indications of the cytokine storm. If the patient on fifth day has a persistent cough, patient should be, without any hesitation, should be started on inhalation of budesonide, which should be given by the nebulization. Many patients have been using the ipratropium bromide or the SLM. These drugs should not be used in the COVID-19 disease unless the patient has the bronchospasm, because ipratropium bromide causes good amount of dryness and makes the patient much more uncomfortable. Patient should not, the treating physician should not hesitate to start the oral steroids if the patient is complaining of sudden increase in the weakness associated with the rising levels of CRP in the second week of illness. If the patient is in the second week of illness, please do not hesitate to start the steroids. Which steroid to use? You can use the dexamethasone sodium phosphate 8 milligram. I'm saying that it is dexamethasone sodium 8 milligram. There is a lot of confusion about the 6 milligram because the trial was done with the 6 milligram, but it is the dexamethasone salt, which is 6 milligram. which comes in the dexamethasone sodium phosphate 8 milligram. It is equivalent to the methylprednisolone 32 milligrams IV or orally, as well as the bisolone or the prednisolone 40 milligram. Any of them they can be used, but I prefer to use dexamethasone and I find better results with this drug. They can be people can be having good experience with the methylprednisolone, nothing to criticize about it. What are the precautions to be taken while giving these steroids? Kindly monitor the blood sugar level of all these patients. Patient might be having no diabetes. They might say that they do not have diabetes, but kindly monitor. And if you monitor these patients, they will say that you will find that the blood sugar levels are high. What do you do in case the blood sugar levels are high? You kindly give them DPP4 inhibitors, that is the vildagliptin or the sitagliptin along with the metformin. And most of these patients, they can be monitored, they can be they can be managed at home with these drugs. Do not give them do not give them drugs like dapagliflozin or SGLT2 inhibitors, because these drugs, they cause a good amount of dehydration and these patients might be already dehydrated. And kindly look for the secondary bacterial infection and the fungal infection in these patients on steroids. How long to give the steroid? They are to be given for 5 to 10 days. There is no need to take up steroids after a short course of 5 days. And the steroid should not be given in the asymptomatic patients, in patients who are having mild symptoms and less than 7 days of duration, and patients who have CT score of less than 8 with the normal SpO2 and in the early viremia phase. Anticoagulation, people have been asking us, like, when do we give low molecular weight heparin, or do we give the newer anticoagulants when the disease based upon the D-dimer levels? Absolutely no. All the patients who have the hypoxia should be given the anticoagulation. How long should it be continued is a matter of controversy, and there are no guidelines even from the best of the societies all across the world. Tocilizumab is one drug which the people have been, before the tocilizumab, I come to the remdesivir. Remdesivir is one drug which has been really in short supply. Remdesivir has a role to play in those patients who are having early hypoxia, those who have been able to maintain their oxygen saturation at low levels of oxygen flow. And in these patients, remdesivir can be given. The drug has not been shown to decrease the mortality, but it has been shown to decrease the duration of stay in the ICU. Coming on to the tocilizumab, tocilizumab is one drug which the ordinary physician should not use at all, because the drug has high chance of causing secondary bacterial or fungal infections. And in one study in our Max hospital, all the patients who were given tocilizumab unfortunately expired. So we are pretty scared using the drug. A word about monoclonal antibodies. You might hear a good number of monoclonal antibodies with all fancy names, Bala-Mimimab, and so many names. They are still to come to India. They have been there in USA for a good amount of time, but they are effective only in the viremic early phase, and they are yet to be launched. Most of the patients most of the clinicians, they want to know about the various drugs like ipratropium, the ivermectin, the azithromycin, doxycycline, all these drugs, they are being used. We do not have enough data for these drugs. But there's some good amount of data coming for the antiparasitic drug, that is the ivermectin, to be given 12 milligrams per day for 5 days. And be careful that the COVID does not leave somebody after 15 days. The patients might be complaining of fatigue, patients might be complaining of headache, body ache. Even after they have recovered from the illness, their SpO2 have started coming up normal. Particularly when the patient comes into some stress, so he goes somewhere here and there, and the very next day he starts having mild fever. Coronavirus is there in the body to tell those, do not worry, I'm still there, the inflammation is still going on. So many of these patients, they might require SOS anti-inflammatory drugs. That's for now. And now I leave this is about the summary. 80% of the COVID-19 infected patients will recover without hospitalization. Hydration and rest, their importance should not be undermined. All the patients should be asked to rest at home. They should take a good amount of water. Paracetamol is the main drug for the fever. If the fever does not come down, and if the patient does not have any kidney issues, do not hesitate to add any anti-inflammatory drug like piroxicam, nimesulide, or Meftal. And the steroids, they are indicated in the hypoxic patients, but do not hesitate to start steroids if the patient is deteriorating. That's all for now. Thank you very much for patient hearing. Thank you so much. I open the session. I hand over the mic to Dr. Vikram Jaggi and Dr. Pradeep.
Thank you, Satish. Very, very comprehensive presentation. Am I visible? Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Visible?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So, thank you, Ninja, for organizing this thing. Thank you, Satish, for setting the ball rolling. You see, we are all nowadays called upon to answer the questions of our friends, family, our near and dear ones. Just pick up the phone and call us to ask that this is the situation, what should one do? The purpose of this meeting, to my mind, was to equip all of us to answer these questions confidently and also based on good science. There is a lot of panic, and the patients are looking towards us doctors, not only the ones who are treating, but all of you here, whether they are pathologists, radiologists, pediatricians, ENTs, to at least guide them as to what is the correct approach. So that is the basic purpose of today's meeting, to try to figure those things out. Reassure the patient. That is one of the most important things. And I don't see Sandy here, but हम सबको पता है कि वो सैंडी की जो रीअश्योर वाली कहानी थी वो तो सबको पता ही है कि सांप काट लेगा तो सबसे पहले what will you do, sir? I will reassure the patient. So in this situation also, that is very important. So the calls that we get are कि अब ये पॉजिटिव हो गया है, फीवर आ रहा है, RT-PCR is positive, कौन सी दवाई शुरू करनी? Which cocktail? There are so many cocktails. On which day test should be done? HRCT एकदम से कराएं, ना कराएं, क्या करें? Then there are these wild goose chases for, okay, your patient is going down, somehow go and get remdesivir, somehow go and arrange for plasma, tocilizumab. Are they worth it? Is it a Sanjeevani Booty, or they are just, the doctors are just sort of telling people to get off their backs and, you know, go and do this thing, or don't ask me, I've done my best. So these are some of the things that we thought that we will discuss. Role of steroids is extremely important, and as Satish has alluded, the timing of that is extremely important. So the purpose of this whole exercise is to pick the brain of Satish, who's been dealing with COVID patients for a very, very long time now. And he's been posting on a daily basis on our group, and very, very insightful comments he makes every day. Panic management. I will ask Satish, first of all, that, you know, I have also got willy-nilly into trying to help patients with COVID. And the biggest challenge is the phones that you get, sir ji, ye saturation fluctuate kar rahi. What the hell is this fluctuation? They put it over there on the finger and they start glancing at it. Even before the poor chap, I mean the instrument. अब वो अच्छा वाला instrument जो है for checking the oxygen saturation is costs a big deal, and ये 500 रुपए वाले क्या होंगे ये meters? Now they're all coming from China. They give erroneous readings, leads to a lot of panic. So just hang on there, let it collect the reading, wait for about 15 seconds, ignore all the other readings. These are small things. So my first question to Satish is, okay, when you calls, sir, oxygen saturation गिर रही है, क्या करें? अस्पताल में कोई बेड मिल नहीं रहा. I'm not asking specifics. I'm asking, how do you manage the panic of the patient's relatives? Over to you, Satish.
Thank you, Dr. Vikram. My request to all my patients is that first you put on the pulse oximeter on the middle finger. This middle finger, the largest finger, the longest finger. Secondly, you let it hang around there for about 10 seconds and then let the reading stabilize. And third thing is that you tend to report a high reading because everybody is panicky and they want to be reassured that their oxygen level is high. And the physician should try to elicit the lowest possible reading because the oxygen saturation decreases post exercise. So fifth day onwards, and maybe even earlier, these patients should be asked to go for a 5-minute walk inside their room. And if the oxygen saturation dips to more than 4%, this should be taken very seriously. And it's also important that somebody can measure their oxygen saturation during sleep. If any time the oxygen saturation dips below 94%, it should be taken as an early indication of impending respiratory failure, and they should be given the benefit of doubt. If the patient reports a lower reading, that should be taken in rather than taking a higher reading, and the benefit of doubt should always be given to the patient.
One point I would like to make over here is that, sometimes there is very incessant, uncontrollable coughing. And soon after coughing, the saturation naturally goes down because there is some amount of breath holding. So I've had so many occasions where patients, I get your point, Satish, but the other side is also true that, patients get so panicky, all their readings are above 94, 95. That one reading which comes soon after a bout of incessant violent coughing, which is 88 or so, sets the panic alarms on a phone, all that thing starts. So that also sort of has to be a little bit kept in mind. What I am advising my patients or, people who are asking me is that first and foremost, please let one treat you. To my mind, ये बहुत बड़ी problem है आजकल because the people are just not satisfied with one doctor. They are going to ask, they will ask one opinion, then they will take a second one, then they will do a khichdi kind of a thing. And then they will ask the first doctor about A to B, B to C, and C to A. But the other doctor was saying that you should not give ivermectin. And then they will ask, but he was saying do this. It's a total khichdi. And not only it's a khichdi between the doctors, now the relatives also have started jumping in. You start the treatment of a patient and then suddenly कि वो जी हमारे आगरा वाले फूफा जी कह रहे थे कि रेमडेसिविर लगनी चाहिए और वो जो हमारे चाचा जी हैं जो वहाँ पे रहते हैं अंबाला में वो तो कह रहे थे कि भाई टोसिलीमैब जरूर लगवा लो और साथ में फ्लेक्सेन लगवा लो एलिक्विस इज नॉट गुड इनफ नाउ दिस सॉर्ट ऑफ थिंग्स हैव स्टार्टेड हैपनिंग सो सतीश योर व्यूज ऑन दिस कि एक जने को स्केयर करने देना चाहिए व्हाट डू यू फील अबाउट दिस
Dr. Vikram, my take on this is that I generally do not criticize any of my colleagues. And whosoever started ivermectin, somebody has started the doxycycline, somebody has started the azithromycin. My personal opinion is that azithromycin, doxycycline, or even the favipiravir do not have any antiviral efficacy. These are the drugs which are being prescribed by everybody. Because even me, I also prescribe these drugs, though a good amount of data is coming in favor of ivermectin. But there was one drug which was called as Tamiflu, which came for SARS. And this drug, when it was given, it improved the patients dramatically. This was one drug which was effective as an antiviral agent. We have favipiravir, we give the favipiravir to the patients for a long duration of time, there is no effect. Patients still go into the respiratory failure, they develop pneumonia. The drug is not very effective. The phase 3 trials of the drug have not yet been released, but most of the people, a large number of physicians are giving the drug. If a patient asks me, should I take favipiravir? I said, go ahead. I don't have any issues about it. If you want to ask me, it is your choice. If somebody has started, I don't criticize him. Somebody has started the doxycycline, somebody has started the azithromycin. I say it is fine, it is up to you. Even if you want me to give some azithromycin to you, I do give some azithromycin. But I do believe that these drugs, they do not make a substantial change in the natural history of the disease.
So Satish, my next question to you is a very direct one. Suppose your own Chachaji's, Tayaji's son, let's say, he's 45 to 50, he's not been vaccinated, no comorbidities. And he has fever, his RT-PCR is positive, he's day number 2. And he's asking you to, Doctor Saab, please write a good prescription for me. No ambiguities, सीधी बात, no bakwas. What will be your prescription be as far as only antiviral, whatever antivirals are concerned? 1, 2, 3, what will you include in your prescription? सीधी बात.
If the patient is into my confidence and is not going to criticize me, he's going to trust me, I'm going to advise him rest, good amount of water, paracetamol for the fever, some antihistaminic for the cough, the steam inhalation. That's all.
No
And
antiviral?
keep on monitoring the oxygen saturation.
I got
If
it.
the patient is not into my confidence, please.
I
If the
got it.
patient is not into my confidence, he is going to say that Dr. Gupta doesn't know anything about it. He has not given me favipiravir, he has not given me ivermectin, he has not given me erythromycin. Then definitely I'm going to start one of these drugs. I usually use a combination of ivermectin and azithromycin.
Dr. Satish, I am 100% in agreement with you, both in theory and in practice. You have put it very, very, very clearly that the key issue is whether the patient has your confidence or not. If he has, really speaking, nothing, but really ivermectin and starting ivermectin is really not such a bad idea. It is safe. Even the government of India, even All India Institute, the latest circular which they have taken out, it mentions that even in the mild cases, if there are comorbidities, you can start ivermectin. That's the ratification from All India Institute also. But I am in 100% agreement with how you have put this thing. So nowadays, when I am seeing the patient time, my first line of questioning is, because it's the time is limited, you have to sort of understand the whole thing, write a prescription in 15 minutes, all teleconsultation, everything. So rather than allowing the patient to just go on and on, you ask very clear directed questions. What was the first day of your symptom? What was the highest and lowest temperature? What was the highest and lowest oxygenation? And you keep noting them down. And if the patient is more than 45 or 50 for India, the key question is, did you get your jabs or not, or two? To my mind, after, I must have now seen about many patients, I'm not giving the number, many, more than 1,500 or so, but families 50, 60 where everybody is infected. Practically everybody is infected. And the Dadaji or the Dadiji who's elderly, who's frail, who's likely to be suffering the most, he or she is sitting happy, usko kuch nahi ho raha, very low fever, nothing, because ek tika ya do tike lag gaye. You see, 2 tikas, of course, 2 vaccines, people are doing really very well. But even with 1 shot, many of the elderly people are doing well. And their youngsters, their children, 30, 40s, 50, they are sometimes struggling because they haven't got their turn for the vaccine. So in the asking the history and making a sort of a rough assessment, what's going to happen, game changer. It's not as if the Dadaji who got the jab is not getting symptoms. It's not that his RT-PCR is negative. He's getting the disease, he's getting the infection for sure, but he's not getting a severe one. This has been absolutely the game changer. Let me ask Satish some other questions now. So Satish has alluded to the signs to watch out for: fever coming back, saturation. To my mind, the general feeling of the patient, whether he's feeling better every day or not better every day, is extremely important. And fever coming back sometimes is worrisome. So my question to Satish will be, would you be happy, Satish, to give somebody steroid if his but the fever is not coming down below 102, 103, 104 on the 4th or 5th day? Very clear question.
Sure, definitely. These patients, they should be started on the inhalation steroids, particularly in the second wave. We have been seeing good number of patients who are having persistent fever, that too in the range of 101 degree Fahrenheit. These patients, one should not delay. They should be carefully monitored, and one should start with the inhalation steroids in case they have constant cough. And I'll be happy to start them on low dose steroids, say about 4 milligrams of dexamethasone, or say about 8 milligrams of methylprednisolone.
So coming to the steroids, the dose, see, this is important for all of us over here. I know Satish has a preference for dexamethasone, and he will, I think, explain why that is so. So the dexamethasone 6 milligram, what is considered the standard, is equivalent to 40 milligrams of prednisolone or visolone, is equivalent to 32 milligrams of methylprednisolone. So I'm talking about oral home therapy, dexamethasone 6, Medrol 32, visolone or prednisolone 40. Now, what are the situations, Satish, where you would like to use something lower than this standard? And what are the situations where you would like to use something higher than this standard? And after answering this question, please answer why you still feel that dexamethasone is a little better.
I'll first answer the second question.
That's easy for you. Okay.
Not that's logical. Because dexamethasone is pretty economical. It is widely available. Secondly, if you go into the pharmacokinetics of pharmacodynamics and the mode of action of the dexamethasone, when you compare the anti-inflammatory activity of dexamethasone, it is 30 times more than hydrocortisone. While the anti-inflammatory activity of methylprednisolone or the prednisolone is only 5 times the hydrocortisone. And we are using a corticosteroid here mainly for the anti-inflammatory activity. Secondly, the recovery trial was done with dexamethasone. There have been certain trials with the methylprednisolone which have shown the data to be slightly better off, but they have been really largely small trials, and I know the corporate hospitals, they have a fancy towards using certain drugs for the reasons best known to them. But in case the dexamethasone is available to my patients, I would ask them to use dexamethasone. And I'm again emphasizing the dose as 8 milligram of dexamethasone sodium phosphate. There is nothing called as 6 milligrams of dexamethasone. The trial was done as per the international standards as 6 milligram, which was actually the 8 milligrams of dexamethasone sodium phosphate. Then coming on to the second question, when do we scale up the dose of steroids, and when do we maintain the low dose? If the patient is not deteriorating, if the patient has improved with the low dose steroids, the fever has started coming down, the cough has started improving, patient is not feeling weak, we can continue with the low dose steroid. But in case the patient still feels weak, patient is having the signs of inflammation, fatigue, high grade fever or continuous fever, patient feels weak, patient has started showing the readings of hypoxia, one should scale up the dose of steroids. The maximum dose of dexamethasone which I go is 8 milligrams twice a day, or prednisolone I give to 40 milligrams a day, but maybe 20 milligrams twice a day, or 40 milligrams once in a day. And for the methylprednisolone, it is 16 milligrams twice a day, or 32 milligrams once in a day. Maybe IV or maybe oral. Oral or IV, they will not have much issues as long as the absorption of the drug from the gut is not hampered by diarrhea or the vomiting or other malabsorption issues.
Thank you, Satish. That was very lucid. A few words about inhaled corticosteroids, because that's right up my alley. These people are generally not people who have been trained or who are used to taking inhalers with spacers and stuff like that. Nebulizer also is not something which is very easy to understand. So just writing that, okay, this is the inhaled medication, this is the dose, and this is the nebulization is simply not enough. You have to make some effort to teach them properly. And at least I have found it very useful to have templates and to have small videos. They are all available on YouTube. If anybody wants, I've collated them. So whenever I'm writing an inhaler with a spacer, of course, to a patient who's COVID and I want to deliver inhaled corticosteroids, either inhaled route with a metered dose inhaler or as a nebulizer, I make it a point that somebody from the clinics, the staff, they send the video along with that, the prescription. So that's important. Satish, a clinical question for you. 50-year-old lady doing okay, non-diabetic, 8th or 9th day of the disease, CT score of about 9, having home oxygen, maintaining around 90, taking intermittent oxygen. You have put her on steroids for the last 3 days or so, on the usual dose, 16 milligram Midrol morning, evening. You find that the TLC has gone up a little bit and the polymorphs are also slightly high, say 11,000, 14,000. Polymorphs are 90%. Patient is looking okay. This looks like she's responded to the steroid. She's on some broad spectrum antibiotic. Would you like to change the antibiotic? Would you like to give intravenous, or what would be your line of thinking?
See, that basically these patients, they should be admitted in the hospital, and the procalcitonin level should be measured. If the procalcitonin levels are high, it suggests that there is some bacterial infection. But these patients, they are generally, even these days, they are in the homebound treatment. And if the antibiotic is not up to the mark, it will always be better to change the antibiotic. And if it is like possible or feasible for the patient to have an IV antibiotic, that is definitely going to help a lot.
I get your point. I'll offer a counter view just to be the devil's advocate. I have encountered about 10, 15, 20 such cases in the last couple of weeks. And my initial reaction was also the same, a little bit panicky, a little bit wondering what's going on. But you know, the surprising thing was that other than that lab value, all these patients were doing well. And then I realized that very likely it was the steroid effect, which was the increase in the TLC and the polys. And lately I've started holding my ground, and I don't sort of flutter like a leaf. I say, koi nahi chalte hain, isi ke saath chalenge. And to my happy surprise, they all settled down and I'm able to stop the oral antibiotic also. So just a point to keep in mind that when we are giving steroids artificially, and this is known to all of us, that Basu is here in the group. Basu could explain this better, that steroids have an effect on the TLC to go up a little bit, of course, with the neutrophilia. So
very
Satish,
very important to share with everybody what Dr. Vikram said. Like it is the clinical scenario which should take over the lab value and other things. I had a friend of mine, a doctor, a cardiologist, who had very high procalcitonin levels. And he gave me a panicky call, Dr. Gupta, my procalcitonin is also high. How come that it has come high? And I'm like, are you fine? He said, I'm fine. I have no issues. Just ignore it. So it is the clinical scenario which should prevail.
panicky calls or panics, in my experience, directly proportional to the money the patient has. Number one, the more money he is, the more panicky he will get, the more number of calls you will get from him, the more he will be basically a pain in the ass. Number one. Number two, the more well-read he is, the more the panic, and doctors panic the most. So मैं तो कान हाथ लगा लेता हूँ कि अगर डॉक्टर केयर में आ जाए, it's very, very difficult, but yeah, we all have to do it. So you alluded to the IL-6 and the problems over there. So IL-6, really speaking, it's basically a transportation problem. And now because of the rush and everything, obviously there are less than optimum situations for collection transportation. So IL-6 going all over the place is not unusual at all. CT scanning. So, you know, people who get this problem on the third day or so, because their relatives start pressurizing them, कि अभी तक डॉक्टर ने आपका CT scan नहीं कराया, so you should go for your CT scan. So again, that same problem of moneyed and privileged and affluent people, they want, for them it's nothing, it's just a little kharcha. Why don't we get it done? Doctor, what's the harm? That's the question. If you tell them that, hang on, it's not necessary in the first 5-6 days because it's going to come near to normal. It's just a false sense of security. But they don't listen. They still go and do a CT scan. And sometimes that lulls them into a false sense of security. That third, fourth day, they got the test done and the CT scan was normal. So they think that there is no there's no COVID pneumonia. And sure enough, things start becoming worse. So this is something important for all of us over here. There's no point of doing CT scan too much in a hurry. Wait for about 5-6 days, see the clinical situation, and only then ask for the CT scan. The CT scan picture is extremely characteristic. So sometimes when your RT-PCR is coming negative and you got the CT, you don't do the CT scan to diagnose this thing. It's not required.
I
But
think
yeah,
Dr. Pradeep Rastogi can enlighten us more about the CT scan.
So
it's pleasure to be it's pleasure to be here among you. Now there are relevant points. What treatment would you start? Just now a point. So see, I always advise to start an antiviral drug, ivermectin and azithromycin. This will take care of the atypical microorganism. 3 days course of ivermectin. That's what it will do. If send the patient for RT-PCR is positive, then you just go with another antiviral drug, Pavifluvir. It may be effective in mild to moderate cases. If the patient fails to settle down and the CRP and hypoxia is there, is a time. I think there's an alarm bell to get a CT scan in 6-7 days. And CT scan has its own relevance in a hypoxic patient. Then there are other points of debate. At what time? I think as soon as you have a patient in 6-7 days of steroid, there is a time when you must start the patient if the patient has any feeling. And the right hand middle finger is the best finger to see the saturation. And best time to see the saturation after 5 to 10 minutes of rest. And early cases, hypoxia is there when the patient start having some exercise. That is very relevant. And exercise hypoxia is a very early indication that the lungs are being affected. See, if you have a patient of hypoxia, combined there is a time to and if your CT scan is indicating that you have a moderate or severe degree of hypoxia involvement, then you must start the patient higher dose of steroids. Oral steroids, I think that like you have a if you're giving Madrol, then it must be 16 milligram, maybe BD. In a moderate case, 16 milligram OD, and there's no point of giving small dose. Mild to moderate cases, you make small doses. As far as the low molecular weight heparin, I think all hypoxic patients, all hospitalized patients, irrespective of D-dimer, they should be given 40 to 60 milligram of enoxaparin. If the D-dimer values are higher, they should be given at least 40 to 60 milligram twice a day. We have seen patients of myocardial infarction. We have seen patients of what we call CVA. That is, they are the indications for even giving thrombolytic therapy in this group of patients if they have other anticoagulation parameters are within normal limits. Then, as far as the IL-6 and I think that now we are no more seeing increased mortality. We now more and more patients in our Jaipur Golden are getting IL-6 or drugs like itolizumab, and patients are getting benefited. There is absolutely no doubt. As far as the oxygen therapy, if your patients are sick, I think every ICU setup should have more what we call as high flow nasal cannulas. They are the one which can deliver very high amount of oxygen, maybe 15 liter, 20 liter, and maybe up to 40, 50 liters. And of course, you can combine with a less amount of oxygen. They save oxygen because they combine a high amount of air. And of course, you have other modalities like NIBP and non-invasive ventilators. And as far as the antibiotics are concerned, I think there's absolutely no doubt all patients in mild cases should be given to begin with azithromycin. If you are combining Pavifluvir, there is absolutely no harm giving doxycycline. In case of hospitalized patients and ICU setups, they should be given broad spectrum antibiotic, maybe like Monosep. If patient is very sick, absolutely no harm in wasting time because super infection. And as far as the steroids are concerned, a very large dose of steroid, maybe in very sick patient, like 80 milligram of methylprednisolone twice a day for 3 days are being given by our chest physicians. This is known as a pulse therapy, and the patients will respond in a cytokine storm. And I think in a cytostorm, a very high dose of steroid because that is the time when low molecular weight heparin is also there, and you should give full dose of heparin. You should give and broad spectrum antibiotic, and of course a good amount of oxygenation. I think there's the way, and of course ongoing febrile illness is an indication in a mild setup also is an indication of steroid therapy. Patient may be there for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. If the patient continues to be fever, I think that is the indication of giving fever. As far as the investigations are concerned, the most relevant and day-to-day marker is C-reactive protein, and of course that is the most important. CBC is very relevant, and of course we have neutrophil lymphocytic ratio is very relevant as well as more than 3.5. And I think most of the points have already been told.
Okay, thank
Anything
you.
to add, I will.
Thanks a lot for that summary. I've been asked by Ninja Boss, and we have to listen to the boss. He says that the questions from the chat box need to be addressed. So there are some very interesting questions there. One has come from Chopi, and a couple of them have come from Ramani. Chopi has asked an interesting question. There is only diarrhea in this patient. RT-PCR is coming repeatedly negative. What will you do? Rastogi, batao bhai, kya kare?
But if you have in this epidemic, we every patient until proved otherwise, I think is a COVID only. Any patient of mild weakness is COVID. Any patient with undue shortness of breath is COVID. Any patient of febrile illness, any undue diarrhea in this epidemic portion, nothing but COVID. I think we should respect COVID and give him treatment like a COVID illness. We should not deprive. There's absolutely no harm in giving mild to depending upon the severity of the illness. If you can go for other markers also. You can go for CBC, you can go for C-reactive protein, you can go for D-dimer. Most of the markers may turn out to be positive LDH also. I think mild to moderate doses of steroid, even in case of chronic diarrhea, may settle his diarrhea also.
I will put my 2 cents over here. If there are obviously many other patients in the household, and this particular of COVID, and this particular patient is having diarrhea, it can be assumed very easily that this is also. So that clinical context becomes very important. So I agree with what Rasu has said. Ramani has asked some very interesting.
They can be called as suspect COVIDs.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, absolutely.
Would you be starting steroid in a suspected COVID?
No,
Rasu?
the question is that the steroids are not.
See, suspect COVID. See, if you have a patient in your family of COVID, and if you have symptoms of COVID, and if you are waiting RT-PCR, but still your blood test may come the same day, like you have a CBC, C-reactive protein. I don't think you can start on smaller antiviral drugs. There's absolutely no harm.
I would rather differ, even if a patient has not been able to, like we have not been able to prove by RT-PCR that this patient is having COVID. And the clinical scenario and the chest CT scan, they indicate towards being as COVID, and the patient life is in danger. There is no harm in starting steroids.
Yeah, agreed. We have so many patients who are RT-PCR negative, and we have a COVID-like illness. Almost, see, RT-PCR may turn out to be negative because it is detected best on 5 to 8 days. So many laboratories have come up. The person who is having an oropharyngeal swab may not take it that diligently, and now the reports are taking its own time, 3 to 5 days, long list. So absolutely, if you have concurrent evidence of investigations, I think this is a COVID-like illness. You can treat him like a COVID.
And even by law, we are not required to have COVID RT-PCR as positive to admit these patients under the COVID ward.
See, now there's nothing like COVID ward, Satish. Now the hospitals, hospital have been turned out to be COVID hospitals. See, now there is absolutely no problem. See, any patient coming to the hospital, there is no criteria now. See, there is nothing like now we don't have COVID ward, non-COVID ward. Whole hospital has been converted for treating the COVID patients. Is the epidemic, we patients are being treated like COVID.
If we are with your permission, I'll go to the next question. Ramani has asked, please define what is mild symptoms. It's a good question. So moderate and severe is the definition is rather simple. Mild upper respiratory symptoms with or without fever, but no respiratory problem. Mild. Moderate. Moderate is oxygen saturation less than 94 or respiratory rate going above 24. And severe is oxygen saturation going below 90 and respiratory rate going above 30. This is what the All India Institute of Medical Sciences has suggested in a very simple way. So I think that's a pretty good definition. One point I wanted to raise about this question people are asking, after the treatment is getting over, they say that, doctor, at what date should I do the repeat test? They are wanting to sort of get a negative report. I mean, the concept is understandable. If you have a tuberculosis, you are positive in the beginning, you want a negative report and you feel that it's better. So there is no point of repeating an RT-PCR after 10, 14 or as many days, because the test never claims that it can differentiate between a dead virus or a live virus. It will just simply pick up a dead virus also. So if it comes out negative, if it comes out, positive at the end of 10, 15 days, it means nothing. So no point of repeating RT-PCR after the illness is over. Some questions I wanted to ask.
Another point to make over here is that even the law does not mandate somebody, like somebody cannot be prevented to join office for the want of a negative report.
Yeah.
Vikram, allow me to intervene and just a quick this thing. Can we have a rapid fire question round where you ask a quick question, 10, 20 seconds for the answer? Seedhi baat.
Okay. Let me just go to the questions that are in front of me and I will start shooting the questions. Okay.
ठीक तो चल रहा है यार निंजा, ठीक तो चल रहा है, बढ़िया चल रहा है, चलने दे ऐसे ही.
Dr. Vikram, are you share? Dr. Satish, are you able to hear?
I'm here.
Yeah, you are treating a patient on steroid, the patient with mild to moderate symptom. When do you advise that you should be absolutely in the hospital? Patient on steroid, maintaining oxygen, but the moment it goes below 90, or still if the patient continues to have fever with steroids, as you said, you will like to start with continuous fever, and the patient is maintaining saturation around 94. When will you like to shift the patient to hospital, or you continue to treat those moderate cases at home?
Before the experts answer this question, which of course they will, I will ask a counter question. I think this question is a moot question. It's a moot question. Beds hai nahi bhaiya.
That is a fact. That is a fact. That is a fact. I know. That is a fact.
It's just like saying कि आप hospital bed ले लो, but I don't know where you do it. Okay, now please the experts can answer.
My advice to all my patients who have the oxygen saturation below 94%, that you try to arrange a bed, have the home oxygen. The indication is to admit the patient at an oxygen saturation less than 93%, 94%, even on walking. This homebound treatment is a majburi. It is absolutely no choice. I tell my patient, try to arrange a bed and go to the hospital, nearest hospital. Why is it so? Because these patients are maintained on the oxygen saturation below 94%. They are maintaining themselves at 90%. But some of these patients, they might deteriorate. And who deteriorates, one does not come to know. And these patients, they might not be able to manage themselves with the oxygen available at home. Oxygen concentrator has its own limitations. Oxygen refill at the hospital and at the home is pretty poor. We do not have any high flow nasal cannulas. We do not have BiPAP at the home. So all these patients, they should be categorically told that there is indication to find a bed, and in case you find a bed, kindly go to the hospital.
This is very, very important for this meeting to understand the situation, get apprised of the situation, and act accordingly. There are no beds, there is no oxygen in the hospital. Now, as doctors, we have to give that confidence to a level, and I think it will be 90% of the patients, so that they do not panic and they don't search around for beds and trouble us. Bed dilwa do. I've been dealing with my very close relative, my mama, for the last few days. At the same time, looking for a bed which is not forthcoming, but being able to hold him at the home with the treatment which you have already told. So this is what I think should be emphasized to this group also, that this is what needs to be done at the present moment. As you said, Satish, this is not the right thing. Giving oxygen by concentrator or oxygen, yaar ye koi matlab mazak hai. It is kind of a parody on medical care, but unfortunately we have to do it. So that is why we are here to give a message how to deal with it.
No, the problem remains. Getting a bed is a luxury now. Is a COVID in class I wrote a few days back, and the ideal situation, as Satish has put it right, any patient with a falling oxygen level, hypoxia, needs not only oxygen, is antiviral drugs, injectable steroids, injectable heparin, and at the end of the first week, we have an impending cytokine storm. And we are losing patients, the society is losing patients, and in our neighborhood where patients are dying. So it's a very pathetic situation for the doctors, the healthcare, the government. Things are bad and they're getting worse. And there's you can't help it. I think starting steroids, absolutely no harm. Arranging oxygen, there is absolutely no harm. But at the same time, keep on trying.
Exactly.
Among
Okay,
the
can I
chat,
ask a question?
Ramani, I will come into your question only. Ramani had asked that question, that is there
Yes.
any association with a mild disease with anosmia? And in that chat box only, I read that Anjan Dhar has answered that question already, that this is nowadays realized that it is not necessarily so, and there is not a great correlation with that. Many number of patients with anosmia are becoming serious. So there is not a good correlation between anosmia and mild disease. Ramani, you wanted to ask another question?
Yes, yeah. So thanks, Vikram. See, this is related to this, the whole, let us talk about the practical scenario. Like Jesse correctly said, there are no beds, right? Now, how do we tackle those patients who can be treated at home? And how do we tell those patients that, you can do these things so that you can stick at home, because they're not going to get a bed anyway. They're not going to get a bed. So how do we try to reverse the process in patients who can be treated at home? So the next question that I'm asking is, in relation to this is, with all the discussions that has happened, now do we focus on getting an oxygen cylinder or a concentrator in our homes, so that now that we know that we're not going to get a bed available, so at least try to get those moderates into mild, get the moderates to a mild situation so that they can recover. So I mean, I'm just being very practical here. What do you suggest?
Ramani, see, the thing is that people have started concentrators. People who had taken them on rent are not returning it, even though their patient has become better. People have, it's human nature, it's not going to change. But what we can do is at least be aware which person in our family circle or friend circle has access to a cylinder or a concentrator, so that if somebody needs it, we can beg them that please give it for such and such period. And I have seen people who have surrendered and given their concentrator for a more needy person, And you know, they have actually provided that. Societies have started doing it's lying for the whole society. 2 or 3 concentrators, whoever needs, they have it. So my suggestion is find out that if need be, where are you going to reach out for, and don't put it for yourself, which is never going to be used in any case. That's criminal.
Sorry, I didn't get the last point.
I said don't hoard it only for yourself.
Oh,
You don't-
obviously not. Obviously not. Now,
Use
my
it-
question now is, see, can we as a group, can we, work towards having a few cylinders so that we can help each other? We can contribute. If the finances, we can contribute through finances.
Ramani, concentrators is a good idea. Cylinders is very problematic nowadays. It gets
All right,
finished.
concentrators.
Filling it is extremely difficult. Concentrators are a valid alternative. Some people have started, buying them from Dubai, etc., and they are going to reach India in a couple of days. So all that is happening. Concentrators is a good solution. And keeping them in a sort of a central repository. For example, my modern school group, they have arranged 3-4 concentrators for a group of about, similar to ours, about 100. That whoever genuinely needs, they will just put it in a taxi and send it over there. So that kind of an initiative is very good.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
That's something which we can also do. I mean, that is
Yeah.
something very, very practical.
Yeah, practical. Yeah, it is.
Vikram, a quick suggestion. I see Anjan's hand, which is raised, and can we address some of the questions in the chat? There are a lot of questions in the chat, and I also see Harish Gupta raising his hand. Just these 2 hands, let them make a quick question, and if we can address the questions in the chat, Vikram, over to you.
The chats, I got a little bit, involved in other things. But meanwhile, if Anjan can unmute himself and share with us a couple of 2-3 clinical points, because he's been very, very active practically and academically for a very long time now, and he's been here with us. So Anjan, please unmute yourself and share with us 2 clinical points.
Hi, Vikram. Thank you. It's fantastic to see everybody sort of joining hands. I have a couple of sort of comments to make and a suggestion. The suggestion is in line with what Ramani and you have been suggesting, is to probably enable friends and family for people who are outside of India, if they do fall ill and have COVID and can be managed at home, it would be really good if we have a panel of people who can support families to provide oxygen and also carry out video consultations. So using WhatsApp, you do a consultation once a day, assess the patient. You can almost assess a patient on video at home and make some rapid suggestions of increasing oxygen, starting steroids. I mean, I know that recovery trial didn't recommend out of hospital dexamethasone, but I think times have changed. And with the pandemic being what it is in India, I think it is time for some disruptive thinking to use dexamethasone at home, supported by a video consultation from a panel of people who are willing to give up 30 minutes of their time in a day. Would be really good. Other than that, I mean, I have no real additions to make except the tocilizumab story, which is published in Lancet this week, where tocilizumab has been shown to be beneficial over and above dexamethasone in the UK, but it is in a hospitalized ITU setting, predominantly ITU patients. So don't ignore tocilizumab completely. Thanks.
Thank you for the insightful thing. One question coming from Arun Dugal. Is HRCT indicated in a patient who's having fever for the last 5 days and the saturation is fluctuating between 92 to 96? Rastogi, kya karna chahiye bhai?
I didn't hear your question. Bradycardia?
नहीं ब्रेडिकार्डिया नहीं है. अरुण दुग्गल पूछ रहे हैं कि एक मरीज को HRCT करना चाहिए अब कि जब उसको 4 या 5 दिन हो गए फीवर के and his saturation is between 92 and 96. तो वो पूछ रहे हैं कि HRCT करना चाहिए स्टेज पे 4 to 5 days.
There is absolutely no harm to get a HRCT should always go for 6-7 days if the patient continues to be hypoxic, clinical hypoxia, because if the is reassuring, if the patient has a mild disease, it will be reassuring that he can be continued to be managed at home. If it's found that he has a moderately severe disease, a large score, 12, 13, 14, that is alarming bell that he may land up in a day or so in the hospital. So I think HRCT should always be done. The patient who is hypoxic, who is showing at rest less than 95, on walking less than 92, 90, HRCT should always be done.
I want to highlight here is the problem of over treatment. A lot of patients who are getting lots of medications. You feel that these people are being over treated. The problem is how to have the gut to reduce those treatments, because at that point you do not know whether he's going to progress to moderate or severe. And if you reduce, you look like us at the end of the day. So how to say no to pre-existing over treatment? Satish, any? Satish, Harish wants to ask a question. Please unmute yourself and ask the question, please. Harish?
Vikram, just a small suggestion. We have been doing a little bit of social things here. We have formed a helpline, but we were receiving number of calls, maybe 50 to 80. Then we did another thing, that we formed a group of patients who were COVID positive, and we got their groups made on the WhatsApp. And then a volunteer used to take their questions in the whole day, and the doctor was available with those questions for 1 hour, maybe 5 to 6, 6 to 7, whatever time. So a doctor used to answer and address those 30 to 50 patients in one go. So that was a way to reach large number of people. We have a group of around 40 to 45 doctors here. So they are able to cater to large number of people, and patients think that I have met a doctor personally. So that is a way we can reach out to large number of people in this time when it is 25,000 in whole one day in Delhi. That is a suggestion.
Fantastic, Harish. And this is actually the practical use of easy technology, WhatsApp, etc. That rather than a one-to-one, involve many people. Fantastic. This is like a group educational endeavor. Fantastic. Fantastic.
Vikram, I would like to intervene and just say a couple of things. I don't know if you've sort of faced this, but a lot of relatives have asked me that the chemist has told them that Tamiflu is available, Fabiflu is available, everybody's buying, why don't you buy? And this is something we need to come out strongly and advise our friends, our social circle, not to start hoarding medicines, not to start hoarding oxygen concentrators, oxygen cylinders, so that the people who need them can get it when they need it. So this is something I think we need to strongly emphasize. Over to you.
Good point, Ninja. But I would like to define hoarding. You see, somebody buying 20 tablets of Medrol, 10 milligrams each, is not hoarding. This is perfectly logical, perfectly to do it, because I have also done. I don't know. I'm vaccinated. I feel reasonably assured, but who knows? So that much is okay. But buying 200 tablets, that's the garbage. That is to be completely, and the government has to, say, okay, it may become political, but there is no sort of a policy from the seems. It's all each one for itself. But the point is well taken, that reasonable amount of steroids, I think every family, every household should keep nowadays. Ninja, would you like to wind up?
has his hands up, and also some rapid fire questions from the chat. If we can have some of those, so that it's already, I think I see 11:09 p.m. we've already overshot our allocated time, but it's very interesting, and thanks to all the experts, Satish, you and Pradeep, to sort of really get everybody going. Over to you.
Thank you very much.
Vikram, you
Thank you.
mentioned about
Yeah, please unmute and speak. Tandy, we can't hear you. Unmute yourself, Tandy.
hi, sorry. Am I audible now?
Yeah, perfectly.
Yes. See, you mentioned about your Modernite group getting the concentrator. So what is the specification of the concentrator that they have got? Because what recently I am reading is there's something called the weightage of the compressor. A very lightweight compressor is of no use because it is not giving proper oxygen concentration. So what I read recently was something called 15, 20 kgs. You have any idea about this? And number one. Number two, if you know, what are the brands people are using? You know, specific brand, where, what specifications, so that things can be arranged and then we'll kind of find the source.
Tandy, good question, Tandy. See, the market is flooded by fly-by-night operators who are giving bars in place of concentrator. A good concentrator would be which is giving a 92-93% pure oxygen at a flow of 4 to 5 liters, at least 10 if preferable. And a 5-liter capable concentrator is going to be weighing in the minimum of 20, 21 or 22 kilos. It's a very heavy machine. The good brands are Philips, the good brands are DeWillis, the good, but आजकल मिल नहीं रही हैं बिल्कुल. The market is flooded with Chinese products, and many a times it comes when you open it, the brand new thing, you open the box and it doesn't work. This is happening quite a lot. But I've given you some of the brand names which are reliable ones. Weight is absolutely correct, 20-22 kilos in the minimum. Ninja, I think it's time to close the meeting. I would urge you to take the reins now and close the meeting now. Ninja.
Thank you, Vikram. Let's have some key closing comments by Pradeep Rastogi, the key takeaway messages. He's already alluded to a number of them in his earlier intervention. Pradeep, over to you. If you can summarize your key takeaway messages, and the challenge for you is if you can do it in 2 to 3 minutes. I know it's challenging, but over to you.
See, if you have a patient of febrile illness in this epidemic, consider it to be COVID. And there's absolutely no harm in starting the patient and prescribing something like azithromycin and ivermectin, and send the patient for RT-PCR and do CBC and C-reactive protein. And if the patient is RT-PCR is positive, the patient continues to have fever, absolutely no harm in starting on a combination of something like doxycycline and Favipiravir. If the patient continues to have high-grade fever, even after 6-7 days, this is the patient who is likely to get hospital admissions. And if the patient continues to have symptoms of dyspnea, then this is the patient who may require a HRCT scan. And if the patient continues to be hypoxic, in spite of a small amount of oxygen therapy, send more investigations, blood investigations, and which may, because this is the time to start a patient on steroid. Patient may require a high dose of steroid in spite of being at home if the patient has a high HRCT scan score. And if the patient is lucky to get admission, this is the patient is a candidate to start on remdesivir, absolutely no harm, because this is the drug which is likely to decrease morbidity in a hospitalized patient. If your IL-6 is high, if the patient is C-reactive protein is high, this is the patient who is likely to get benefit by tocilizumab also. And if the patient comes in the hospital setting in a very early phase, maybe 6-7 days of viremia, 7 days at very rapid onset, absolutely no harm in giving plasma. Of course, if the patient lands up after 8-9 days, this may not get benefit. And I think patient continues to benefit by steroid, low molecular weight heparin, These are the keystones of managing therapy. And steroid is a drug which is the thing we should be given to one and all. And I think, and apart from oxygen, the proning position in the hospital setting or at home, exercise, respiratory exercises may reduce the demand for oxygen. This is very important. And you continue to do your respiratory exercise at home. And of course, we have forgotten the use of zinc, which may be supplementary drink, good hydration. This is very important. And rest is very important. Any patient in this COVID should do minimum work. If the community is doing, if the advantage of lockdown also, if the society as large is doing rest, I think the chances of converting a mild to minimum disease is there. I think that's the salient points.
That's beautifully summarized.
Thank you, Dr. Pradeep.
Anuj, one more important thing for everybody.
Yes, please go ahead, Dr. Satish.
Please do not wait for the steroids to start. Whenever you are feeling that the patient needs steroid, give it then and there. Please do not wait overnight. It can be catastrophic. Timely intervention is extremely important. At times, the families, they have a problem that there is nobody to go to buy the drug. Please somehow arrange few tablets of dexamethasone, maybe prednisolone. Give a dose to the patient in the night itself.
Good point, Satish. My prescriptions of mild patients also, I am writing below that procure. Do not start, procure a reasonable quantity of steroids and keep it handy.
Thank you very much. But I would like to be play the devil's advocate here. All of us have heard about the invasive fungal infections due to the use of systemic steroids, especially in diabetics, especially in patients with immunocompromised. Again, a very small number, but again, to keep it at the back of your mind, if you're starting steroids, make sure you follow up on a daily basis with the patient, either through a video call or through other means to ensure that the patient is doing well. And look forward to any signs of invasive fungal infections, which could be swelling of the sinuses, swelling of the eyes, and other sort of symptoms which can be, or unexplained fever and other sort of symptoms. Again, not to detract from the key message, steroids are critical, strongly recommended. And I would like to take this opportunity right now. We already close to 11:17 p.m. We had planned this till 10:45, 11 p.m. latest. And I would like to extend thanks to, first of all, Satish, Professor Satish Kumar Gupta, who is...
No, not at all, not at all. Only a colleague.
Who is one of the teachers of the group. So Professor Saab, thank you very much. And the second professor is Professor Vikram Jaggi, who's been teaching us also. And the third professor, Dr. Pradeep Rastogi, who's also been one of the key people teaching us. And also he's one of the COVID survivors, and he's passed through this. So he sees it up close. And I understand a number of questions have been unanswered in the chat. And we will take cognizance of, summarize all these questions and the key takeaway messages from this meeting into a document which can be shared so that everybody's on the same page and we have cohesive takeaway messages. And we are, this is the first of this meeting, and next meeting we will open it to a much wider group. And today, out of the 70 plus participants, right now we have 47. The maximum we had was 71, 72. Of these, 1/3 were not the MAMC 81 batch. So my suggestion, let's do a more cohesive meeting next week with Harish Murjani also, with just key takeaway messages for doctors who are treating their family friends, or extended social circle in taking care of the patients. Over to you, Satish, for the last word.
Those who have been taking care of their family and friends should understand that the steroids can be life-saving, and they should not hesitate to start the steroids at the right time. Recognize the symptoms. Second important thing is that whenever somebody calls to you in distress, kindly take his call. हो सकता है कि आप सहयोग ना दे पाएं, पर सहानुभूति अवश्य दें. धन्यवाद.
Thank you, all of you. Thank you, Satish. Really a great pleasure listening to you. Thank you, Vikram, and thank you, Dr. Pradeep. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting. So you'll all drop off in one shot. Thanks again.